Hello, welcome to my channel. This is the second video dedicated to the orchestration of the Menuetto of Sonata No. 7 by Ludwig van Beethoven. The idea is to produce a version for string orchestra of the first section of this piece, and in the previous video I showed you a trick that I use with my students to help them achieve this more easily. Create an intermediate score, which I call a vocal score, a version of the piece written on 4 or 5 staves, in which they write a polyphonic arrangement that follows the traditional conventions of voice leading. Now I'll show you how to create a simple but effective orchestration for strings using the vocal score of this piece. If you want to try your own solution, I've included links to the vocal score in the description of this video, both in PDF and XML format. Beginning orchestrators generally run into the same problem when writing a piece for strings. They don't know how to fit the traditional 4-part harmony scheme into the 5 sections of the string orchestra. To understand this dilemma and its solution, we need to review a bit of orchestration history. At some point in the 17th century, it became quite common to write a 3-part polyphony for 2 violins and a bass, by which I mean a group of instruments known as the basso continuo, whose purpose was to play the bass and provide harmonic support. This 3-part scheme became very popular and survived well into the classical period. In fact, you'll find several string passages from Haydn and Mozart symphonies that are written with only 3 voices, the violas generally doubling the lowest. Also, if you've ever seen an orchestral score from the classical period, you may have noticed that the double basses don't have a separate staff. Instead, their name appears on the same staff as the cellos. That is why they were called double basses, because their function at one point was simply to double the cellos an octave lower. Towards the end of the 18th century, composers increasingly wrote 2 voices on the same staff assigned to cellos and double basses, to give both groups some independence. This later led to their final separation into 2 staves. However, composers continued to write the double basses doubling the cellos an octave lower most of the time. This is what you'll find in various string passages in orchestral scores of the 19th century. A 4-part harmony in which the lowest voice, played by the cellos, is doubled 1 octave lower by the double basses. It's an arrangement that has been used for centuries, and as simple as it is, it's incredibly effective. There are more elaborate and original ways to orchestrate for strings, surely, but the traditional approach of doubling the bass an octave lower is still a viable solution and will work perfectly well in most cases. So, with that in mind, let's take our vocal score for this piece and turn it into an orchestration for strings. What I'm going to do is just copy the entire score and paste it into the top 4 voices of a string orchestra score. Then, from measures 1 to 14, I'm going to do what I mentioned before. I'm going to double the cellos with the double basses an octave lower. In measures 15 and 16 we have 2 voices on the cellos. This is because the music in those measures couldn't be reduced to 4 voices, so I wrote 2 of them in the staff for voice 4. I don't need to split the cellos. I could, but it's not necessary. I'll just take the second voice and give it to the double basses. The next part of the piece is not in 4-part polyphony. It simply lays down a 2-measure motive in different successive transpositions, and the first entry is too low for the cellos. Also, if we want to emphasize the imitation, which I think we should do, it's best to give each repetition to a different section of the string orchestra. Therefore, I'll give the first to the double basses, the second to the cellos, the third to the first violins, and the fourth to the violas. The poor second violins will not have a repetition of the motive, but will have the melody for the next 3 measures, which should be enough compensation from leaving them out in this passage. From measures 25 to 30, I'm not going to use the double basses. I think Beethoven has avoided the low register for a reason, and I'm going to respect that decision. Also, this will make the entry of the double basses at measure 31 a bit more dramatic. From measures 31 to 42, I'll continue the traditional approach of writing cellos and double basses in octaves, and this should work perfectly fine in these measures. Finally, starting at measure 43, I'm going to do something different. If you look at the original piece, you'll notice that the melody is doubled an octave lower. Therefore, to make this orchestration sound closer to what Beethoven wrote, I'm going to follow exactly what he did. I'll write the melody in octaves between the first violins and violas, voice 2 in the second violins, and voices 3 and 4 on cellos and double basses respectively. And there you have it, a simple but effective string orchestration of the Menuetto of Sonata No. 7 by Ludwig van Beethoven. However, we're not done yet. There are 2 additional things we have to do. The first one involves dynamics. You see, a solo piano piece doesn't require many of them because there's only one musician, who can make decisions about them at any time. Also, in the past, it was quite common to indicate very little dynamics. We could leave Beethoven's dynamics as they are. In the end, the musicians themselves will add some interpretation. Well, yes, they surely will, but not without wasting precious rehearsal time. A string orchestra can have up to 60 members, and obviously they cannot read each other's minds, so they have to agree beforehand. Why not decide this ourselves and spare the musicians the trouble of doing it? So, if we want our orchestration to have some musicality, we'll need a few additional dynamics. We're not free to do what we want. We must respect the work of the composer, but we can stretch it a bit here and there. There are numerous ways to do this. I'm just going to pick one based on my musical intuition and my knowledge of the piece. And there it is. The second thing we have to do is determine the bowings. The bow is not endless, as I'm sure you already know. The musician has to change its direction from time to time, and this is indicated in the score mainly with slurs. There are many things to consider when writing bowings. Tempo and dynamics are 2 of the most important. I'm afraid I can't turn this into a lesson about bowing. It's a very complicated subject and would require a very long video. I'm just going to give you one piece of advice. Avoid lengthy slurs, like this one, unless you're absolutely sure they're possible. It's better to split them into 2 or 3 smaller slurs. Of course, if you don't do this, the musicians will have to do it themselves, and that raises 2 problems. The first is that they'll be the ones to decide this, and not you. The second is that, again, this will consume some rehearsal time, and we all have little time these days, don't we? That's all for now. I hope you liked this video. I'll leave you with a playback of this score. Next week, I'll show you how to turn this simple version into a more advanced one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care. Ciao.